With viral TikToks reaching millions every day, historic climbing moments playing out in real time on YouTube live streams, pro climbers serving up Instagram SponCon for luxury sunscreen and dandruff shampoo, and brands drafting sponsorship budgets around virtual engagement, social media is deeply embedded in climbing. Social media is advancing a new era of the climbing experience.
Okay, I'm recording again.
Athletes and community figures have amassed celebrity-level followings online. Over 1 million people follow Adam Ondra on Instagram. Over 700,000 follow Janja Garnbret. And Magnus Mitbo has generated nearly 500 million views on YouTube. My local climbing gym provides an in-house selfie stick to encourage Instagram shares, and I make my living making climbing videos on the internet. Climbing is a sport with a history of counterculture sentiment and an affinity for the dirtbag lifestyle, with many climbers rejecting mainstream culture. But more and more, our exposure to climbing is experienced in 16:9 snippets, complete with a trending audio and a call to action. And that raises some questions. Are we entering a new era of climbing media where views count for more than sends? Where social media performance outweighs climbing performance, and influence outweighs authenticity? I think there's more to it than that. I think there's more to it than that. But we'll get into that. As a climbing content creator with an interest in climbing and in internet culture, I wanted to dig into climbing and social media to ask, is social media improving climbing, or is it making it worse? Are people like me ruining the fun for everyone? So my relationship with social media and climbing is pretty interwoven. I'm a climbing influencer, if you like, or a climbing content creator, if you don't like, or a professional climber, which many of you won't like. Whichever way you slice the pie, social media platforms have a significant impact on my experience of climbing, and likely yours too. Whether we like it or not, we're all participants, scrolling, posting, liking, and consuming content. Globally, the average person spends over 6 years of their life on social media. It's an attention economy, and we're all living in it. But as participation in climbing skyrockets, I set out to uncover how all of us, athletes, creators, and brands, are responding to the growing influence of social media in climbing. I've spoken to figures across climbing on some of these topics, and I'm really excited to share those perspectives with you. A really good example of the intersection of climbing and social media played out a few years ago on one of the most iconic boulders of all, Burden of Dreams. In a remote Finnish region, as Will Bosi tweaked his fingers into the impossibly small starting holds, steadying himself for his first attempt on a boulder with mythical status, 80,000 people watched through screens hundreds of miles away via YouTube. The live stream runs for nearly 2 hours, and in between attempts on the boulder, Will turns to the camera, talking to his phone as though to a friend.
I'm sorry, the camera's quite far away today. I thought better to get everything in the horizontal, though. I think looks better. So
physically, he's immersed in a project, but mentally, he checks in with us, his audience, and promises the content he'll deliver over the next few weeks. Maybe he's already thought of the Instagram caption that he'll write when he sends. Climbing for an audience isn't a new phenomenon. Much like doing anything for an audience has been commonplace since the dawn of civilization. Gladiators perform for crowds of fans, as did the first Olympians, and climbing competitions and traditional climbing media have positioned climbing as a spectacle for decades. So why is it remarkable that now we're watching historic climbing moments go down in social media live streams and real-time updates? I think what stands out as different to me is the immediacy of that audience and social media's bleed into our real lives in real time. What I'm interested in is how that might change our experience of climbing and how it might have changed Will's. Many question the long-term psychological impact of social media on individuals and their sense of self, and we can apply the same questions to climbing. To what extent has Will's climbing experience, but also our climbing experience, been digitized, tracked, and tied up in metrics to the extent that our real selves have become almost indistinguishable from our online avatars. For an athlete, or any climber really, could the reality blurring impact of social media and the erosion of the fine line between reality and virtual reality carry consequences for our experience of climbing or our ability to live in the moment? Maybe it changes what motivates us, how proud we feel, and where our validation comes from. In the case of Will and the Burden of Dreams livestream, I personally feel that that was a stroke of athlete marketing genius, and I don't feel that it was symptomatic of an erosion in climbing. But there might be examples elsewhere where this blurred line is having more negative impacts.
Big question. Is social media benefiting climbing or making it worse? That is massive. And when you have an attention economy and you create followers, you create groupthink. And then, so sadly, when that feeds into the outdoors, if someone popular tries a problem, everybody goes and tries that problem. And then you get crags which are like honeypotted and crushed by affection, or bouldering areas. And then you get the inability of people to have the confidence to go elsewhere and to try things which are quiet because it might not be cool or be perceived as cool.
And this leads us into my next question. Is social media changing how we experience motivation and validation? The Chicago School speaks to the social psychology of the saturated self, which warns of an Orwellian world where technology might saturate human beings to the point of multiphrenia, a fragmented version of the self that's pulled in so many different directions that the individual would be lost. When we exist in the online space, we exist in a global social network where feedback loops for external validation and gratification are amplified. We're encouraged to be performative, in climbing content, but just in general. We are quite literally hardwired to respond to the instant dopamine hit that social media provides. It's difficult to contest that perhaps in our clamour for social currency, we could lose sight of the more authentic, in-the-moment experiences. When asked why we climb, many would like to answer that it's a return to a natural movement pattern. We really love the climbing community. Climbing gets us outside and into nature. But how many of us would truly be able to say that we don't enjoy the parts of climbing that we can post on social media? As someone who shares a lot of their climbing online, I'm aware that it's really difficult for me to draw complete separation between my climbing and my climbing being perceived and judged in an online environment. My relationship to my own improvement and the confidence and joy I take from climbing is muddied by how it plays out in a public forum. If I ask myself whether or not I want to improve my climbing purely for myself, or whether or not I want to be seen to improve my climbing, whether that's important to me, I don't really know the answer. My motivations feel intrinsic, but in truth, I feel uneasy in the knowledge that whilst travelling on a climbing holiday, for example, I might feel more validated once my hardest send is uploaded, seen, and perhaps liked. Fundamentally, the dopamine targeting gratification offered by digital platforms surely intersects and drives our motivations. The ability to choose what we share online gives us an enhanced ability to build a picture that might not be truly reflective. There's outright fabricating reality, but there's also enhancing it or curating it. This is a social behaviour that absolutely predates social media, but I do think that a continued distortion to some of the distorted realities online can generate an unhealthy comparison for climbers. If we assume that social media does shape our experience of validation and motivation, what might happen when doing it for the gram pushes us into risky territory?
This whole project of trying to climb, film, edit, produce something and then have something decent at the end, I think it's basically going to be a whole nother ball game.
Social media has made it possible for people to feel pressure to perform even when they're alone, says Professor Jerry Isaac in The Impossible Climb. In some cases, our fixation on social currency or views can have grave consequences. As Dave Wetmore expands in his article, Are They Pros or Posers?, Engaging in risky behaviour so that others will notice us is not a new concept that has only emerged with this generation. What is new, however, is the near constant virtual presence of the others we're trying to impress. With the development of social media and related technology, other people nearby has been simultaneously expanded to a potentially worldwide audience and shrunk to the size and portability of a smartphone. On the other side of the coin, we do see social media being mobilised to educate around safety and best practice. Recently, you might have seen the viral video of the climbing accident where a professional climber was dropped from the top of the wall due to improper use of a gree-gree at a French training camp. This viral clip generated a bunch of online education and conversation around unsafe belaying practice, and hopefully opened a few eyes to the dangers of complacent belaying. But to expand on a slightly less tangible expression of risk, I also wanted to consider, I guess, the existential risk of reframing our human real-life experiences as content opportunities. Climbing is a sport that I feel drawn to, largely because it affords me a feeling of being in the moment and presence, but there's an argument that moving a lot of our climbing experiences online takes us out of the moment and out of the more authentic experience of climbing. How many of us have thought, what I'm doing right now will make a really great post later? If our climbing experiences become content opportunities, does it damage our ability to truly enjoy them in the moment?
Hi Anna, how's it going? As far as social media and rock climbing are concerned, I don't really see what all the fuss is about. I mean, it seems to fit pretty perfectly with the sport. You can upload a 45-second reel of you sending Burden of Dreams, one of the hardest climbs that exists, and it's quick, engaging content that everyone can enjoy. You can't really do that with any other sport. You can't encapsulate a FIFA World Cup or a Super Bowl in an Instagram reel. So I think if you have a problem with social media, or you find that your day-to-day life is being negatively affected by social media, you can't go to the gym or the crag without having some negative impact, get off of social media, all right? Put your phone down for 5 minutes.
And putting the phone down might work for most of us. But for professional athletes who share their own climbing in our online social amphitheatre, the weight of pressure and expectation is amplified by the near constant presence of their audience and maybe the demand of sponsors.
So there's this old saying, money don't grow on trees. Well, it don't grow on rocks either, all right? So if you want to make a living climbing rocks, you either have to compete, free solo L cap, or have a social media presence. Those are basically your only three options. So if you like the idea of rock climbing growing as a sport and more people being able to make a living off the sport, there's really no reason to have a problem with social media.
Maybe ironic or at least meta of me to segue here into brand partnerships. Or actually just a really good example of where brands are fitting into the social media landscape is Rungne. Rungne are helping to push the industry forwards by backing athletes and creators who are telling stories online. If you climb, you've probably already seen Rungne around. Their chalk is the chalk that I use. It's genuinely high performance, it's super clean, and it actually lasts. I personally do prefer the chunkier stuff, so that's a personal preference, but a new development of Rungne's that I was super curious about was their new Maglock, which is a primer. And that's not something that I've used before. And I was really interested to see how it would perform. So obviously this little test here that Nathan is doing on the slopers on the hangboard isn't bomb-proof in its controls, but he did genuinely feel like the primer helped. And that's kind of reflected in the footage that I'm showing you. And it's on me as the creator to make sure that the brand and their products fit with my messaging and share my experience with those products in an authentic way. And hopefully you trust that I do use them and like them myself. So if you want a chalk that performs, maybe you want to try out the Maglock. I'm super interested to see how this performs on rock. I haven't tested it out in a rock setting yet, and comes from a brand doing things a little bit differently in the climbing space. Make sure to check out Rungne. So you can use code Hannah to get 10% off, and you can get a free 8-gram Maglock if you spend over $100 with Rungne. Under the rise of social media, our every experience can be exchanged for near limitless attention in a digital marketplace. And in taking part, we risk packaging our lives into marketable content, commodifying our experiences to earn views, likes, or shares. And to see this play out in rock climbing, all you have to do is look to how the role of the professional climber has changed over the last 10-15 years. I really struggle with the idea of curating a personal brand, even though that's literally my job as a professional climber, says Katie Lamb, talking on podcast Careless Talk. I realise that people who get paid more than me but objectively climb less hard boulder problems are better at the job of climbing than I am. The job of climbing, as Katie puts it, is more than just climbing. It's translating that experience of climbing to viewers. And for as long as climbers have earned money through sponsors, that's been a part of their role. It's just that now, the way they share that experience has changed.
Welcome to the Innsbruck trip.
And I'm competing against these guys. Will, crazy strong bowler, he's done burnout.
Yeah, so I'd say the role of a professional climber is changing yearly now, and it's no longer really about just exploiting gaps between previously established routes and developing new climbs or repeating hard climbs the fastest. I'd say it's as important now to find gaps between different algorithm forms on YouTube and find a niche in there and create an area which you can thrive in that is your personality. Or your expression within climbing, and if you crack that niche, you can become a professional climber now, no doubt about it.
I guess like back in the day, we used to support athletes that would make magazine covers or win competitions. So social media definitely has like widened that avenue that climbers can use to access sponsors, access like other fans, let's say. So yeah, I would say it's a net positive for those people that weren't able to do comps, weren't able to, let's say, go to trade shows or go to, these events, industry mixers, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it gives more accessibility to these climbers with social media.
As an audience, it's really difficult to find negatives in that or to complain. We're given this kind of never really before experienced behind the scenes look into the lives of athletes that we look up to or stories that we find inspiring, and providing that we trust their authenticity, we're brought on that journey with them in real time. The article is Social Media Killing Adventure, reminds us that the vast majority of human-powered adventures throughout history have always been recorded in some manner. And more often than not, these accounts have been shared. From carved etchings in caves to handwritten expedition journals, intricate sketches and inspirational photographic images, mankind has long since had a habit of leaving records of its exploits. Whilst a selfie is not exactly a work of art, it could be argued that posting such updates on social media is nothing more than a basic modern-day extension of what we've been doing for centuries. Sharing our stories and creating conversation. The flip side of this new, ever-present news cycle is, of course, the pressure that it puts on athletes, brands, and consumers to remain permanently online. The debate between athletes and influencers in the climbing industry has become a hot topic as social media continues to shape the sport. For influencers, attention is their currency. Athletes, however, are athletes, with or without social media. So I've noticed as a non-elite climbing content creator, working in the brand space as a non-professional climber, that the word influence carries a really negative connotation, and more so the word influencer. It's often said with a kind of sense of embarrassment, a roll of the eye, or even a derogatory tone. And I think that's because influencers viewed cynically represent everything that's wrong or backwards or kind of shitty about society. But what if influence can mean so much more than just shifting products? Might influence also inspire action? Might it encourage people to get into sport, encourage movement, foster a greater sense of community and social connection? Many influencers and many content creators surely, hopefully, are pushing the sport forwards through accessibility, education, sharing relatable experiences, and encouraging climbers to have more positive experiences within climbing. In her article on trail running influencers, Hannah Bell says, "I hate that the word influencer is so negative. Look at what influencers are doing. We're not just moving shoes, we're encouraging people to get outdoors, we're encouraging people to be more welcoming to other runners, to open their minds to what a runner looks and feels like." You can influence people in so many different ways. It doesn't just have to be to open their wallet.
Has been some of the positive of harnessing social media for you? I think ultimately it's forming my community. Like, I started Climber off the back of posting content of me climbing and my friends saying, "Hey, can we join you?" So it's fantastic in terms of like bringing attention to you and bringing eyeballs to you where perhaps you would have been unseen. So I think that's one of the impacts that social media brings.
More than ever, storytelling is shaping influence, and social media provides a vehicle to share stories wonderfully. And so it follows that brands in the climbing space are embracing these new social media narratives because they offer new and diverse perspectives that climbers can relate to and learn from. And sure, they do also help to shift products. But viewed less cynically, influence and the people with it encourage people to start climbing, to enjoy climbing more, to share their climbing knowledge, to share climbing ethics and psych and tips. I'm willing to bet, or at least willing to hope, that as a consumer of climbing content on social media, that there are some positive interactions that you can cast your mind to, or some friendships that have been bolstered, or at least a tip or two that you've stumbled across that have made your climbing experience more valuable. One of the overarching positives when considering social media's impact on climbing has been its incredible power to democratise a climbing media that has historically been managed and gatekept by a fairly homogenous group. With the resources to capture and share climbing experiences in an online setting, where consumers vote with their views, social media has enabled the broadening of perspectives. Now, you don't have to be climbing V15, thank goodness, to be a compelling storyteller in climbing. In fact, in lots of cases, it might help your cause if you're not, where relatability and what people feel affinity towards is concerned. So before social media, I guess magazines and maybe more mainstream films controlled the narrative, and if you weren't a professional climber sending double digits, probably with a good connection to a local photographer or a connection to somebody that worked at a magazine, then you probably weren't going to have your story picked up or your achievements shared. Maybe no one would ever hear about them.
I think, yeah, lastly, social media as a whole for climbing is a net positive for me. It is beneficial in the sense that, like, let's say back in the day, there was like in the US anyways, there was that boulder bubble. So if you didn't have a Colorado bro that wrote for Climbing Magazine or Rock and Ice, you weren't gonna get on that article, you're not gonna make the cover. So, finding new athletes, new creators that we're working with that has something to say that's not like typical, I'd say, narrative that was in the past.
As Matt Samet writes, with the dawn of Instagram, Facebook, and more recently TikTok, climbers of all levels have gained a direct and loud voice. Today, Instagram is the primary source for climbing news, delivering unfiltered stories straight from the climbers themselves, bypassing traditional media gatekeepers like me, and it's resonating more deeply. Let's look at running. In the case of the New York Marathon, the top 10, I think, most followed athletes on the day were influencers, suggesting a real step change towards relatability and what people, the consumer, feel a greater affinity towards. Social media has grown to become a really powerful tool for people to bring attention to not only themselves or their brands, but wider social issues and movements. Social media has given everyone, regardless of background, a voice in shaping a more equitable climbing culture, says Kathy Carlo, climber, writer, and host of For the Love of Climbing. This shift is crucial as climbing diversifies beyond its historically white upper-class roots, especially with the rise of urban climbing gyms. So is social media making climbing better or worse? And I think the answer seems to be it's both. or more so, it depends on who you ask. Maybe social media has amplified both the best and the worst parts of climbing. It's brought global attention to our sport. It's helped fund athletes and inspired better inclusivity and representation in climbing. But it's also contributed to a culture of validation-driven risk-taking and maybe the sale of the individual to the highest bidder. The truth is, the power of social media will always lie in its application and use. The responsibility lies with us, the climbers, to ask ourselves how we choose to direct our attention online. Climbing has a lot of room to grow with social media, but the responsibility to cultivate online spaces and value creative expression, education, safety, and sustainability is ours. For me, social media has been an amazing vehicle to explore and connect with climbing, myself, and other people. I really do think that the more people can see themselves reflected in online content, the more empowered they can be to realise their potential in sport or engage with climbing in a more positive way. While athletes bring merit and dedication to the sport and its progression, content creators excel in communication and community building, engaging audiences in more unique ways. Both, though, I think we have to want to build the sport in a positive direction and create a better place for future climbers. Yes, there might be outliers that take more than they're willing to give in return, but that's true of social media just as it is in life. And as I see it, the answer isn't pitting athletes and influencers against each other, but building on what the climbing community claims to be best at, which is finding solutions. Since its inception as a sport, climbing has been constantly evolving, and it will continue to alongside social media, with professional climbers, influencers and brands building the playing field. There's a lot of talk about living in the moment, whether or not social media is taking away our ability to live in the moment, but maybe social media and the technological age that we're living in is the moment, and we may as well harness all of the positive impacts that it can have on us as individuals and on society at large. As Dwayne Riley points out in a recent piece on Rock and Ice online, we watched Neil Armstrong step on the moon via a live television feed, and I don't recall anyone saying, well, there goes adventure.